Well, good morning. We're continuing our lessons. I still quite haven't figured out what our lessons are about this quarter. That's all right. I just kind of make it up as I go along. And today we look at King Josiah. How many of you have remembered about Josiah? Vaguely. All right. Okay. I sort of had to be reminded myself, but
he's a good king.
Well, yes, he's one of the
One more.
As a matter of fact, both Second Kings and Chronicles say that Josiah. Let me get myself together here. That Josiah was a good king who did well, and they don't say that about me. So Josiah became king when he was a child, about 8 years old, probably, king of Judah. By this time, the northern kingdom has fallen. The Assyrians are dominant in the east, in the known world. Although their time is beginning to come, there's hints of trouble, but and Judah has become thoroughly cosmopolitan, I guess. There are little places of worship all over the kingdom where people worship a lot of different gods, not just Yahweh. And even in the temple in Jerusalem, there are altars to Baal. And there is just the kingdom is in sad and sorry shape. And let me just find something. I thought I had myself all arranged, but then the sun was so bad in church. That architect and Dr. Cunningham never thought that anybody was going to be in that sanctuary at 8:30 in the morning. So Josiah, he was 8 years old when he became king, and he ruled for 31 years in Jerusalem. He did what was right in the Lord's eyes and walked in the ways of his ancestor David, not deviating from it even a bit to the right or the left. I mean, that's amazing. And in the 8th year of his rule, when he was just a boy, he was about 16, he began to seek the God of his ancestor David. And in the 12th year, he began purifying Judah and Jerusalem of the shrines, the sacred poles, the idols, and the images. What spoke to him, we don't know, but he was really searching for the true God, and he wanted to cleanse the land of false worship and idols. And one of the things that he did, remarkably, was he gave money for the temple to be completely cleaned out, restored, re-sanctified, decontaminated, really. And in the process of this restoration project, it's sort of like ours. You wonder what they'll find over here. They found a scroll. And the scroll was taken to Josiah. And when he read it, he cried out and he began to rip his clothes.
Again.
He began to rip his clothes, because he realized that people of Judah had violated almost everything that was written on this sacred scroll. Now, what was on this scroll? You remember that what we now call the Pentateuch of the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, were codified, written, and kind of got put in the format that we know today during the exile. It's kind of became what they are today during the exile. So what was it that was found in that temple? We're told it was a Torah scroll, and it caused him such grief and consternation that he ripped his clothes publicly and cried out. Most scholars think that it was the book of Deuteronomy, particularly starting with about the 6th chapter. And it was maybe not quite Deuteronomy as we know it, but what is Deuteronomy? And how many of you have read Deuteronomy recently?
You have.
I have, yeah. Well, yeah, I have. It is, well, I also read it again last year when we studied the Torah in that Wednesday morning Bible class. We studied the Torah through looking at the Torah through Jewish eyes. It was fascinating. Deuteronomy is different from the other four books. It is less involved with bringing the people out of Egypt and into the land. And it is very much involved with how you should live your life and what your relationship with God should be. And what probably one of the things that probably threw Josiah was if you start looking at the 6th chapter, if you have a chance when you go home this afternoon, read the 6th through the 12th chapters of Deuteronomy. And you'll have a real pattern for how to live your life. But in the 6th chapter, you have, these are now the commandments, the regulations, and the case laws that the Lord your God commanded me to teach you to follow in the land you are entering to possess, so that you will fear the Lord your God by keeping all his regulations and his commandments that I am commanding you, both you and your sons and daughters, all the days of your life, and so that you will lengthen your life. Listen to them, O Israel. Follow them carefully so that things will go well for you and so that you will continue to multiply exactly as the Lord your ancestors' God promised you in a land full of milk and honey. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. What is that? The Shema. And that is what every pious Jew says every morning when he wakes up. And he says it before he goes to sleep at night. That is what is written on the door in the little box that hangs on the doorway of every Jew, the home of every pious Jew that they touch as they come in and they go out. And there's one in the door of a temple, the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. That is totally in that one saying encapsulates the entire teaching of the Jewish religion, and in some ways the Christian religion as well. So Josiah begins to read this Torah scroll, which has been lying in some dark corner for several generations, and he is completely astounded by how sinful his country has become. He already had a clue, or he wouldn't have been tearing down the altars to Baal and cleansing out the temple. But this really froze him. And then one of the thing that your lesson this morning stresses, and it's interesting, in the 16th chapter of Deuteronomy as we know it now, wait for the month of Abib, at which time you must perform the Passover for the Lord your God, because the Lord your God brought you out of Egypt at nighttime during the month of Abib. Apparently, they had stopped keeping Passover. Now, if you know, Passover is the greatest holy day of the Jewish religion, of Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. But Passover is some. How many of you have ever been to a Seder? I have. And you have, okay. And we'll talk about that in a minute, but Passover is it is like the centerpiece of Judaism. This celebration, this commemoration of this liberation of being brought out of slavery into freedom. And they had stopped keeping Passover. That's it's just unbelievable. They had forgotten all about it. They had forgotten everything. And so the scroll goes on and says, offer a Passover sacrifice from the flock or herd to the Lord your God at the location the Lord selects for his name to reside. You must not eat anything, and then it goes on. So finally, you must offer the Passover sacrifice at the location your Lord selects for his name to reside at evening time when the sun sets, which was the time you fled Egypt. Cook it and eat it in the location that the Lord your God selects. The next morning you can return to your tents. For 6 days you will eat unleavened bread. The 7th day will be a celebration for the Lord your God. Don't do any work. So those of you who have been to a Seder realize that it is the most ritualized meal that you've ever attended. Everything is, nothing is left to chance and nothing is improvised. The whole menu is kind of foreordained. There'll be 4 different kinds of wine. There will be barley, which will be dipped, or parsley, which will be dipped in salt water to signify the tears of the slaves. There will be 4 questions asked by the youngest person present. And the first question is, why is this night different from all other nights? Because on this night, we celebrate the greatest moment in the history of life. It is an unbelievable experience to go to a Seder. I've been to several. I've been to both Seders in private homes and also their community Seders that temples do. And it's basically the same. It's very ritualized. And there's always 1 cup of wine which is set aside, and that's for the prophet Elijah in case he wants to come in and participate. Now, he never has when I've been there, but hope springs eternal. And there's always 1 toast. The toast that for 2,000 years meant so much, and that's next year in Jerusalem. Next year, we'll celebrate Seder in Jerusalem. So they had forgotten about this. And Josiah restores the Passover what he does in essence is he restores the Hebrew religion. He purifies it, clarifies it, puts it back in its place. And among the things he restores is Passover. Holidays, religious holidays are enormously important. And they get perverted, and they do. Christmas turns into a children's holiday with Santa Claus and, presents and
reindeer.
And what?
Reindeer, of course.
And reindeer, of course, reindeer. Of course. And Easter has, I was never allowed to believe in the Easter Bunny. Now, I believed in Santa Claus. I was allowed to believe. I believed in Santa Claus. Oh, yes, did I ever? And I was smart enough to keep my mouth shut when I realized it wasn't true. But my father and mother didn't. The Easter Bunny, he came, but I always knew it was my parents. Because for my parents, Easter was really too important a holiday for a bunny to be hopping in. For me,
Easter Bunny wasn't big in David's.
No.
In our childhood.
No, it wasn't.
We got an Easter basket.
You got an Easter basket, and I'll never. And my mother would hide the eggs in the yard, and I could go. And one year, a snake got them, and I never got any eggs. But no. And we would have Easter egg hunts at school, but we never really believed in the Easter Bunny. Do you remember? I'm glad your parents weren't big on the bunny. Yeah. Okay.
I'm glad you got an Easter egg. So that we
dyed the eggs ourselves. There was none of this stuff about the bunny died before we did it ourselves. And I usually got a pretty nice present at Easter. Something. It wasn't like Christmas, but something. But still the ritual of the holiday. Thanksgiving is actually my favorite of all the holidays because it's not, you eat a meal, but it's not all,
commercialized.
Commercialized, that's the word I was trying. Yeah. And you're with family, and it's a very meaningful time. But what would it be like to be in a place where you don't have religious rituals, where you have forgotten everything? What is when you were growing up? How important was the foundation of your religion to you? You went to Sunday school. You had your week was sort of grounded in going to Sunday school and then going to church. Now, you might have been bored stiff in church. I was allowed to read in church for, most of my growing up. And that was fine. And that was good. I always went to the church library on my way to church and checked out a book. And somebody once said one time that Van Leer Logan had a good vocabulary, and somebody else said, well, she's been reading in church for 10 years. But, rituals ground us. They give us a sense of who we are and a sense of orientation. What would it be like what would it be like to have a year where you didn't have the rituals of Christmas and New Year's and Easter and Thanksgiving? Think about it. But that's what had happened to Judah. And then they discovered this Torah scroll. And Josiah, who's already on the road to, reformation and reclamation, he reinstitutes Passover. And it's never been lost since. There's been Passover. Passover is celebrated even by, I suspect, by non-pious Jews. Remember Passover. Because it commemorates the most important event in the history of our people, the night that we were taken out of slavery. Do you have any reaction to this? Anybody wants to say? How do you think they felt in Jerusalem and all through Judah the first time they celebrated it? They had to figure out all over again how to do it. There were probably some rather elderly people who remembered what a Passover was like. Think about it. What do we got? We got to do what? 4 glasses of different kinds of wine? Dip parsley in salt water? Why?
I think it was, if I recollect, like 500 years had gone by. And I'm just wondering, that was the text of the statement, did Josiah get pushed back? People would come to him and say, what are you doing?
Apparently, now they went to a prophetess named Huldah,
Right.
and she kind of confirmed everything. Like, I've been waiting for this to happen.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Apparently not.
But I remember one time someone posed the question, what would it be for the Christian to forget? What holiday would be most significant for us to forget? Christmas or Easter?
Easter.
Yes. Because why?
Because that's the resurrection. That's the greatest moment in
Right. Right. The incarnation is important, but it's the resurrection that we see Christmas through the lens of.
Well, and Christmas is, I think Christmas is fun because almost certainly Christ wasn't born in December. But when Europe became Christian, they had this great celebration to celebrate the winter solstice called Saturnalia. And it was a big deal in the Roman world. And it spilled out all through Europe. It was a big deal. And it was the return of the sun. Okay. The idea that darkness was going to go away. And so they really just didn't see any reason when they became Christians to give up that big celebration. So they said, well, that's when we'll celebrate the birth of Christ, Christmas. So, well, that's okay. But so it's always been kind of a secondary, whereas Easter has to be in line with Passover. Because why? Why did Jesus go to Jerusalem that week? What was the Last Supper? It was a Seder. He was celebrating Passover. He was a pious Jew, and commemorates the greatest moment in the history of his people. So Josiah literally reinstitutes Judaism. He saved it. He purifies his kingdom. He purifies the religion, and he reinstitutes this great holiday, this great ritual. And then not too long after that, the Assyrians are conquered. They finally are wiped out by this rising menace from the east called Babylon. And eventually Babylon will destroy Judah. And the Judeans are hauled off. Almost anybody who could read, essentially, was hauled off to Babylon. By the waters of Babylon, there we sat down, and yea, we wept when we remembered Zion. How can we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? But they found out they could do it. And I'll bet you one of the first things they did was celebrate Passover. And in that revelation, they discovered that God does not live in the temple in Jerusalem. God is universal, and he lives everywhere. And that is what saved Judaism. because they were allowed to go home eventually. They were allowed to rebuild the temple. But then in 70 Common Era, I always want to say AD, and you're not supposed to do that. In 70 BC, in 70 Common Era, the temple again is destroyed. They are just literally dispersed through all the world. What would have happened to them and their religion if they had not had a knowledge of the universal God, but also these rituals, these celebrations, these rites that held them together as a people? So that on the night of Passover, you had Jews in China and Jews in what is now Russia, and Jews in what became Spain, all celebrating this holiday in the same way. What would have happened if that Torah scroll hadn't been found? Where would we be, actually, sitting here right now, if Josiah hadn't cleaned out the temple and found that Torah scroll? Think about that. So, why do we celebrate Passover on this night? We celebrate the greatest event in the history of our people. The night we were taken, rescued from slavery, and taken into freedom. Gives you chills, doesn't it?
No less a form of resurrection.
Yes, exactly. And so we are very much the heirs of Josiah and have much to be grateful to him about. And I kind of had forgotten about it, to tell you the truth, until I saw this lesson. And I don't know where we'd be if we'd be sitting in this room today if he hadn't decided to clean out the temple and they found that scroll. I don't know. But I do know that, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. That means as much to me as it does to any Jew. So let's bow our heads and say a prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for our heritage. Thank you that we know what you have done for us. Thank you that we remember. Thank you that you give us the ability to commemorate and celebrate. Heavenly Father, we know you are one. We know you love us. We know that you are with us at all times. In the name of Christ, our Father, your Son.
You don't have a hymn to go with today's lesson?
I really don't. Do you?
I've been thinking that you would pull one
No,
out.
last week when you weren't here, I read Byron.
What?
We read the destruction of Sennacherib. The Assyrian came down like a wolf on the pole. Now, I don't really have a hymn. What can anyone think of a hymn that would go with today's lesson?
But I guess for me, what this lesson puts us on notice for is the fact that it is possible to forget.
Yeah.
It is possible to allow cultural forces to be so prevalent in one's surroundings and in one's life, such that over a period of time, you become unaware. And it's like the frog that's in the warm water and someone just keeps stirring it.
Yeah, and eventually boils to death.
Right,
Yeah.
and culture, loves to do that to us.
You could make an argument that that's happening today.
Right, yeah. But the fact that our rituals, our holy times are vulnerable. And that's why we worship collectively on Christmas, on Easter, on Pentecost. And I have to say, it's not mentioned here, but the Holy Spirit's fingerprints are all over this passage. Josiah
God definitely
was nudging.
Yeah. But when you think about it, it's remarkable. He was 8 years old when he became king. Somebody must have been whispering in his ear. We don't know who. We don't
So
know.
he had to have mentors.
He had to have mentors.
Yeah.
But because an 8-year-old, but by the time he's 16, he's directing that the temple be cleaned out. And so it's amazing. God, and we talked about this last week. God does move in history. He is very present in history. So I have one thing that today is the first day of fall, of autumn. And to me, the year really starts in the fall. To me, I've just always thought that this is really the true beginning. And Jews do too. This is Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, it's their new year, which is in the fall. And so I always, at the beginning of the year, both in the fall and in January, I say to myself this poem that means a great deal to me. I said to the man who stood at the gate of the year, "Give me a light that I may tread safely into the unknown." And he replied, "Go out into the darkness and put your hand into the hand of God, and that shall be to you better than light and safer than a known way." George VI used that in his first wartime Christmas broadcast to the British people. And I love it.
Pursuant your, may I make a note?
Yes.
Pursuant your comment on our structure, I had the opportunity this week to write a note about Harper Newbold. And it took me back to that structure that Harper created with our Maloney class. And Tammy and I came when we joined the church. I remember it was coincidental with Rally Day, but we went to Rally Day, and there was Sam Maloney as well as other teachers making their presentation about their class and the structure of the class and the themes of the class. And it was Sam that mesmerized us. That's what brought us to Sam's class. Well, Harper, Newbold, and Sam must have had a relationship. Because Sam said to Charlie Winnell, who recruited Sam and Maloney come out of retirement, back into teaching that class. And Sam Maloney said, "Charlie, I'll do it if I don't have to do that administrative stuff." And that administrative stuff with bringing the class to order and introducing guests and the prayer list and having an opening prayer, and then introduce the showman Sam Maloney with his class. But it was Harper who did that first. And so I don't remember why Harper did that. Perhaps he and Sam had a relationship. I don't remember that. But so it was Harper who would organize this, and each of us would be 1/12, have one month to be what Harper, perhaps Sam, called the moderator to open the class.
Oh, is that how that got started?
That's how that happened. And it's just a great irony. When Tammy and I tell stories, she may tell it one way, I may tell it another way. But we asked both Sam Maloney and Charlie Winnell. They both told the same story. It was absolutely good. So that's how we got into that. And then as Harper's health began to decline, he asked me to take on that responsibility. That's how I got into it. So the pandemic changed us all. So James served Sam communion 6 months ago, whenever the time was. And Sam and James had a great visit. Sam remembered when we had 85 people in that class. It was just jammed. It just jammed the folks. So there was just no shortage of folks to serve as the moderator. And then perhaps after we came back from the pandemic, we had our class was severely diminished in attendance. So I began the reorganization of the moderator process, and we would all take 2 or 3 months at a time. And then just over time, it's just sort of diminished. So I'm going to go back to a member of the class. I haven't done it for this year, but I'm ready to do that. But it's just been tougher and tougher to recruit volunteers.
Well, I will say, I ran into Sharon Sells the other day,
Yeah.
and she's doing much better.
Good.
I don't know if she'll ever feel that she can come back, but she sent her best to everybody. So.
Okay.
That's a question.
Yes,
What time is church today?
11.
Do I have time to tell a quick story?
You do.
I like stories. I think I'm a creature of new beginnings. I think that's what I like to do, is look for new things. So when I got married, that was a shock. Took me quite a while to get oriented. So then, for some miracle happened. We had a baby.
Are you still trying to figure out how that happened?
I'm trying to figure that out.
Betty was very patient with him, but I was a project. So when Julia was born, the Presbyterian, of course, I couldn't witness the events in those days, which annoyed me. So when we left the hospital, Nurse Cratchit had Julia holding me. They got the car out in front of the hospital. And I'm entranced by this little girl. Because I had demanded from the doctor that I see Julia as quick as possible afterwards. And he thought that was a good idea. So I saw Julia about 10 minutes after she was born. Never got over it. So now we go fast forward. Here's a car, here I am. And the nurse has Julia. And she tries to pass it to Betty. Well, Betty's done a lot of work. I said, I'll take her. Oh, no. No, she didn't want to give Julia to me. But I did get her and held her. And I thought it was fascinating. The whole system, her scent, her looks. And Julia was looking at me like, okay, Pops. Let's get the show on the road. Let's do something. And the nurse said, no, you really shouldn't move her. You shouldn't have her. And I said to her, my dear, when I get her home, I'm going to lick her all over. And she said, you're an animal.
She really?
And she said, that's impossible. And I think she wanted to call the police. And poor Betty, she said, honey, people don't understand you. So I didn't take her home and do that. But I was entranced with a new beginning. Brand new. Little girl, she's perfect. Not perfect. So thanks to you, now I'm beginning to understand about Josiah. And that's him.
I think we overlook Josiah too much. I think we owe a great deal to Josiah. And we don't really realize it. And what would have happened if he hadn't decided to purify the temple? If they hadn't found that Torah scroll?
How old was he when he got killed?
He was, he was 8 when he became king. And I would bet he was probably in his 30s somewhere.
He ruled for 18 years.
And it ruled for longer than
For
that.
longer than that.
Because he was about 16 when he decided to have the temple to it. But of course, you've got to remember that 16 was full, would have been considered an adult at that point.
It was sort of crazy how he died, but he got the information I read said that he disguised himself in the army and was hit by a random,
Sharp, Arab.
And I think it was around, I was trying to think, we went to Israel and Megiddo, I believe.
Megiddo, yeah, he was it's down towards the Galilee. That was one of the earth-shaking battles of history in terms of its consequences, which was again that Judah would be destroyed eventually, but the religion was not.
That was where I saw what was it, the trough, the watering trough, and it looked so different from what we show in the thing at Christmas. This thing was carved out of granite.
Oh, it was permanent then, I guess.
It's still there.
What would do think, what if they hadn't had this religious revival, which is what essentially it was, what would have happened to the Jewish people during the exile to the Hebrews? They would have just probably assimilated totally into the Babylonians. What would have happened to their religion? It would have been forgotten. We wouldn't be here.
Does anybody here witness?
I think we can say that.
You don't think, why not? Okay, you don't.
Because I think the Spirit of God.
You think it would have triumphed in some way?
Exactly, yeah, and I hear what you're saying. I feel as if time and again, the good Lord rescues the plan from ruin.
Yeah. And
it's
in
all-
ways that we can't perceive it as,
And it's all epitomized in the resurrection.
And who would have thought that the exile would be the salvation of Judaism? Given what would their future, their history
It's the salvation of human race.
of the human, yeah.
One more, let me finish the aspect of our structure pursuant to your comment. One of the things Sam would send us to do is long before the online days, there was in the office, there was a chalkboard with the prayer list. And before our class, he would send a moderator back to that chalkboard in the office and write those names down so we could memorialize, remember those folks who needed to pray. So I wanted to see what you all would like to do to see if we want to continue with that standard or if we can evolve as we're evolving now. But it was so important to remember those members of our family or friends or
I think that's
That's
important.
it.
Yeah.
So we can all bring those folks together as beginner class and continue that aspect of our tradition and our structure.
Keep us on track.
Has anybody here ever witnessed a best?
I have.
I did, and a close Jewish
Yeah.
family invited me to that. It was very moving. And Lord, if you ever get the opportunity, don't pass it on. Beautiful.
You know what that is?
I'm sure it is moving.
It is moving, it's particularly moving for the little boy. Yeah, it's circumcision.
They
They do it, it's in public, it's a,
they had three rabbis.
yeah, yeah.
And one was sitting next to me to translate the services that went on.
And who did the actual operation? Was that a rabbi?
This is a doctor.
No, it was a doctor.
This is about 30 years ago.
This is a profane comment, but it's a great Seinfeld episode about it.
Oh, there is?
Has anyone ever seen that episode?
Well, yeah, I couldn't hear him.
There's a Jerry Seinfeld episode about a circumcision.
Oh,
Enough said.
my hearing aids don't work well on Sunday morning.
If you ever have a chance to go to a Seder, it's quite an experience. I mean, it is so ritualized. I mean, the whole meal is totally preordained. And you think all over the world, people are sitting down and they're eating exactly the same thing in exactly the same way. It's really remarkable.
And what's the Christian equivalent of a Seder? It's Thanksgiving.
I guess, yeah.
A secular.
Although Jews celebrate Thanksgiving as well.
Well, right, but for Christians,
Yeah.
we really have no meal like that.
No, well, that's right. But we do, Thanksgiving, we do feel like we have to have turkey
Oh, right.
for some reason. The pilgrims. But it's really remarkable. And all through the meal, you know, this very ritualistic conversation is going on and these questions are being asked. It's really something. But it's unifying.